When people picture a cowboy, they think of a hat, boots, and a revolver. But that image misses most of the story. Real cowboys survived the Old West because of what they carried every day, but almost no one talks about. Hidden in pockets, hatbands, and small pouches were practical items that helped them deal with dust, cold, hunger, injuries, and long days far from help. These weren't decorations or movie props. They were everyday essentials chosen through hard experience. In this video, we're breaking down 20 hidden items cowboys carried every day and why each one mattered in real frontier life. Number 1. The bandana. A cowboy didn't carry a fashion accessory. He carried a multi-use survival cloth that solved problems all day long. Dust was one of the biggest enemies on the trail. Dust in your mouth, dust in your eyes, dust in your lungs. So a bandana could turn into a quick face cover when the herd kicked up a cloud or when a windstorm hit. In dry country, it also helped prevent chapped lips and cracked skin because you could wet it and wrap it around your neck to cool down and protect from sunburn. It doubled as a sweat rag, a pot holder for hot metal, and even a basic filter over a canteen mouth so you weren't drinking grit and bugs. If someone got hurt, that same cloth could be folded into a pressure wrap for a cut, tied as a sling, or used to hold a dressing in place until camp. It also worked as a practical signal. Waving a bright cloth over open ground could catch attention faster than shouting, especially in wind. And if you look at real photos, you'll notice the bandana isn't always on the face. Often it's tucked away because you only cover up when you need to breathe clean air or protect your skin. On the frontier, that little square of cloth was basically a wearable toolkit. Number 2. A pocket knife. If the revolver was the symbol of the West, the pocket knife was the reality of the West. A working cowboy used a folding knife for 100 small tasks that kept him moving. Cutting rope, trimming rawhide, shaping a quick wedge to fix gear, opening food tins, cutting patch material, and shaving kindling when firewood was stubborn. Cowboys didn't have a modern toolbox, and they couldn't run to a hardware store every time something snapped. When a strap tore or a knot jammed, you fixed it with what you had, usually a knife and whatever scrap material was nearby. A pocket knife also helped prevent accidents. A dull blade forces you to push harder, and pushing harder is how you slip and get cut. That's why many old knives look wrong compared to new ones. Blades ground thinner from years of sharpening, handles worn smooth by sweat and dust, tips broken and reshaped from prying and rough use. The knife wasn't for show, it was a daily problem solver that kept work from turning into disaster. Number 3. Plug tobacco. People imagine cowboys living on excitement, but most of the job was long hours, aching muscles, monotony, and stress. Plug tobacco fit that life because it traveled well, lasted a long time, and didn't require fancy storage. A man could slice off a piece, chew it, share it, or trade it without needing a bank, a receipt, or even exact change. That's why tobacco worked like an informal, frontier currency in some places. Something you could swap for a small favor, a bit of information, or a quick trade when money wasn't convenient. It also acted as a simple comfort. After hours in the saddle, when the wind was still howling and your hands were cracked from rope, tobacco gave people a steady habit that made the day feel manageable. It wasn't glamorous. It was just common, portable, and socially useful. If you wanted to understand the real West, you follow the small items that kept men calm, not just the big items that made noise. Number 4. A hidden money roll. Getting paid was only half the battle. Keeping your pay was the other half. Cowboys often carried cash and coins in ways that weren't obvious because the frontier had plenty of risks. Pickpockets in rail towns, drunk brawls, ripped pockets, stolen saddlebags, and simple bad luck. Smart men didn't flash money and didn't keep it all in one place. A hidden roll could be tucked inside a coat lining, stitched into a pocket, wrapped in cloth to stop coins from jingling, or placed in a small leather pouch buried deep where a quick search wouldn't find it. This wasn't paranoia, it was experience. A long cattle drive could mean months of hard work, and losing wages could put you in a desperate spot fast. That's why hiding money became a habit, and why a careful cowboy might split his pay into 2 or 3 small stashes, so one torn seam didn't wipe him out. Number 5. A hatband stash. This is one of the simplest, secret banks a cowboy could use, and it worked because of human behavior. Thieves search pockets first. A hat, meanwhile, stayed close. It protected you from sun, wind, rain, and cold, and it was personal in a way other gear wasn't. Sliding a few folded bills under the hatband made sense flat, quiet, and hard to notice unless you already knew the trick. It also explains why some men took hat grabbing seriously. Pulling someone's hat wasn't just disrespectful. It could mean you were trying to mess with something important. And the West didn't reward people who let others handle their valuables. The hatband stash also had a practical bonus. If you got separated from your saddlebags or lost your coat, you still had at least a little money on you right there on your head. Number 6. A small fire starting kit. Out there, fire wasn't a cozy camp story. Fire was warmth, cooked food, boiled water, dried socks, and a way to keep your body from losing heat too fast at night. A sudden storm could drown a campfire, wind could scatter embers, and damp tinder could turn a simple task into a long, miserable struggle. That's why a reliable fire starting kit mattered so much. The most important idea wasn't the exact method, it was protection from moisture and grit. Cowboys often kept matches in a dry container, or wrapped their supplies so sweat and rain couldn't ruin them. A working rider learned quickly. If your only matches get wet, you might spend the night cold and hungry, and that's how small discomfort becomes real danger. Fire starting gear was quiet insurance. You didn't show it off. You just made sure you had it, because the land didn't care if you were tough. It cared if you were prepared. Number 7. A sewing kit. A cowboy's clothes took constant punishment. Saddle friction, thorns, rain, sun, rope work, and the daily grind of chores. A small tear didn't stay small for long. A ripped seam could turn into chafing, exposure to cold, or a situation where your pants simply fail at the worst time. That's why a compact sewing kit, often called a housewife kit, was such a practical carry. It usually meant a needle, strong thread, a spare button, and sometimes a little beeswax to strengthen the thread and make it glide through tough fabric. The kit wasn't about neatness. It was about staying operational. And it wasn't only clothing. Sewing skills could patch a bedroll, repair a saddlebag, and fix small fabric gear before it became useless. On the frontier, you didn't throw things away because they tore. You repaired them because replacements weren't always nearby, and because good gear cost money. Number 8. Rawhide strings. If you want one item that screams real frontier logic, it's rawhide laces. They were light, strong, and extremely versatile, basically the Old West version of a universal repair strap. Rawhide could bind a broken buckle, lash a loose piece of tack, tie down a load, or hold a fix together long enough to finish the day. The key advantage is what rawhide does when it dries. It shrinks and tightens. So if you wrap something in damp rawhide and pull it snug, it clamps down harder as it dries, creating a tough temporary repair that can surprisingly outlast your expectations. Cowboys often didn't have the luxury of stopping work because a strap broke. They needed a field fix right now. Rawhide strings made that possible, and that's why experienced riders kept them handy, even though they weren't cool or flashy. Number 9. A whetstone. A knife is only as good as its edge, and edges don't stay sharp when you're cutting rope, trimming leather, and working around dust and grit every day. A small whetstone let a cowboy keep tools safe and effective. This wasn't about being fancy or obsessed with gear. It was about avoiding accidents and saving effort. A sharp blade cuts clean with less force. Less force means fewer slips, and fewer slips means fewer cuts that can get infected or slow you down. Sharpening also became a habit. A few careful strokes at night, checking the edge by feel, and putting the knife away ready for morning. In a rough world, maintenance was survival. That's why old whetstones found in collections often look rounded and worn smooth. They weren't carried for show, they were carried because they kept a man's tools honest. Number 10. Coffee or coffee beans. If you strip away the myths, the Old West wasn't fueled by whiskey. It was fueled by coffee. Coffee was warmth in the morning, comfort on cold nights, and a mental boost during long watches when sleep wasn't an option. Cowboys often carried their own small stash because camp supplies could run low, and when coffee ran out, morale dropped fast. Hot coffee also helped in practical ways. It warmed hands, made a simple meal feel bigger, and gave people a familiar routine in a life that was constantly moving. Some men preferred beans because they stored well. Others carried grounds for speed. Either way, having coffee meant you had a small piece of control over your day. When everything else depended on weather, cattle, and distance, that mattered more than people realize. Number 11. A tin cup. Simple, tough, and endlessly useful. The tin cup was one of those items a cowboy reached for without even thinking. It wasn't just for drinking coffee. A tin cup could heat water directly over a fire, melt fat or grease, mix flour and water into a quick dough, or scoop water from a creek when the bank was too steep to kneel beside. Cowboys often used it to measure ingredients by habit rather than exact amounts, learning through experience how much beans or coffee grounds filled their cup. Because it was metal, it could be tossed into a bedroll, hooked onto a saddle, or dropped in the dirt without breaking. Many cups were dented, blackened by fire, and bent slightly out of shape, but they kept working. In a world where gear had to earn its place every day, the tin cup survived because it did so many jobs quietly and reliably. Number 12. Salt and seasoning. Trail food was repetitive by necessity. Beans, hard bread, dried meat, and whatever fresh game could be found made up most meals. Salt did more than improve taste. It helped preserve meat, made bland food easier to eat, and replaced minerals lost through constant sweating. Carrying a small pouch of salt or pepper might sound trivial, but after weeks of eating the same basic meals, that tiny bit of flavor could lift morale more than people expect. Cowboys understood that appetite mattered. A man who stopped eating lost strength fast. Salt also had trade value, especially in remote areas where supplies were thin. A pinch of seasoning could turn a shared meal into something almost enjoyable, and that mattered when days blurred together and comfort was scarce. Number 13. A small mirror. A pocket mirror wasn't about grooming in the modern sense. It was a practical tool for self-care and survival. Dust and insects constantly got into eyes, and without proper light or help, checking for irritation or injury was difficult. A mirror made it possible to spot a thorn, a scratch, or the early signs of infection. It could also help examine cuts or sores in places that were otherwise hard to see. Beyond health, a mirror could reflect sunlight as a signal if someone needed attention across open ground. This trick wasn't just for soldiers or explorers. It worked anywhere the sun was strong and the land was wide. Cowboys didn't think of mirrors as luxury items. They thought of them as problem solvers. Number 14. A simple comb or brush. Living outdoors meant constant exposure to dust, sweat, and wind. Hair and beards tangled easily, collected dirt, and became uncomfortable under hats and scarves. A small comb helped keep things manageable, reducing itching and preventing hair from matting so badly it became painful. This wasn't about vanity. It was about hygiene and comfort. When a cowboy rode into town to deal with a ranch owner, a lawman, or a storekeeper, looking somewhat presentable could also affect how seriously he was treated. Appearances still mattered, even on the frontier. A comb was light, cheap, and easy to carry, which made it a practical choice for daily use. Number 15. A handkerchief-sized oilcloth. Oilcloth was fabric treated to resist water, and a small piece of it could protect several important items at once. Matches wrapped in oilcloth stayed dry. Tobacco kept its flavor longer. Letters from home didn't dissolve into pulp from sweat or rain. Oilcloth could also cover a small wound, block wind over an injured area, or act as a temporary water-resistant patch. Cowboys didn't have plastic bags or waterproof zippers. They relied on materials that could do double duty. One sudden storm could ruin half your pocket gear if it wasn't protected. That's why oilcloth became one of those quiet essentials rarely mentioned, often used, and deeply appreciated when the weather turned bad. Number 16. A small notebook and pencil stub. Not every cowboy was literate, but many were. and even those with limited schooling understood the value of writing things down. A small notebook could hold cattle counts, expenses, directions, names of towns, or reminders of debts owed. Memory alone wasn't always reliable after long days and little sleep. A pencil stub mattered because ink pens were fragile and leaked easily. Pencils worked in cold, heat, and dust. Beyond work, notebooks sometimes held more personal notes, addresses, short messages, or thoughts a man didn't want to forget. On the frontier, people moved constantly. Writing something down could be the difference between remembering a detail and losing it forever. Number 17. A spare button and pins. These were the smallest items with the biggest impact. A missing button could turn a shirt into a problem, especially in cold or windy weather. Straight pins could temporarily fix a tear, hold fabric together until it could be sewn properly, or secure a bandage in place. Cowboys often carried these tucked into a corner of a pocket or wrapped in cloth so they wouldn't get lost. You didn't think about them until something went wrong. Then they suddenly became essential. This kind of preparedness, carrying tiny fixes for predictable problems, was a survival habit learned through experience, not theory. Number 18. A small keepsake. This is where the Old West becomes deeply human. Cowboys carried hard tools for hard work, but many also carried something soft and personal. A photograph, a folded letter, a ribbon, a religious token, or a coin with special meaning. These items didn't help mend gear or light fires, but they helped mend the mind. Loneliness was real on the trail. Long stretches without familiar faces or places wore people down. A keepsake connected a man to home, to family, or to a life beyond cattle and dust. These objects were often hidden, not because they were shameful, but because vulnerability wasn't something you showed easily in a rough world. They stayed close to the body, where they couldn't be lost and didn't need explanation. Number 19. A basic first aid item. Frontier medicine was simple, and cowboys relied on whatever was available. This might be a strip of clean cloth, a small tin of salve, alcohol for cleaning wounds, or herbal remedies learned from experience or local knowledge. Even minor cuts could become serious if ignored, especially in dirty conditions. Cowboys learned quickly that treating small injuries early was critical. You didn't need a full medical kit to do this. You needed awareness and a few basic supplies. This wasn't dramatic heroism. It was practical survival. Take care of small problems before they became big ones, because help could be days away. Number 20. A small backup tool for bad luck. Every experienced cowboy understood one truth: things go wrong at the worst possible time. That's why many carried one extra item that didn't look important at first glance. It might be a short length of cord, a bit of wire, a spare flint, a tiny tool, or another simple object chosen through hard-earned experience. The exact item varied from man to man, depending on where he worked and what problems he'd faced before. The mindset mattered more than the object itself. The frontier punished overconfidence and rewarded preparation. That extra item often stayed untouched for weeks or months, until the moment it suddenly became the reason a man didn't have to walk miles back to camp, freeze overnight, or lose his gear entirely. Taken together, these hidden items show how the Old West really worked. It wasn't run on dramatic moments or constant violence. It was held together by small, practical choices objects tucked into pockets, hatbands, and little pouches. Cowboys survived not because they were fearless, but because they were prepared. The quiet gear mattered more than the loud myths, and understanding that gives a clearer, more honest picture of life on the frontier.